Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going on a really profound journey. We're going to decode how one of history's absolute biggest, most incomprehensible tragedies was processed. And we aren't looking at cold, clinical history books today. No, we're looking at brilliant, absolutely devastating poetry. We're diving deep into the literary metaphors behind the 1947 partition of India, specifically through the eyes and the pen of the legendary Punjabi writer Amrita Pritam. Because sometimes when bureaucratic documents totally fail to capture human suffering, art becomes the only true historical record we have left. Just listen to these words. To Waris Shah I turn today. Speak up from the grave's midst which you lie. You can literally hear the raw, somber urgency in that plea, right? We're not starting with dry facts and figures today. We are starting with this haunting cry into the void from a poet who is watching her entire world just tear itself apart. It's this desperate attempt to find some shred of humanity where there's basically none left. Okay, so let's dive into this. How do you even begin to process the displacement of 14.5 million people? Seriously, that's the central question we have to ask ourselves as we shift from that poetic hook into the staggering, real-world scale of the 1947 partition. How does the human mind comprehend a number that massive? Think about what displacement actually means here. It's not just moving to a new town. It's the violent severing of your generational roots. It's frantically packing whatever you can carry in your two hands and leaving behind the only home your family has ever known, literally overnight. 14.5 million. Just let that number burn into your mind for a second. We really have to grasp the sheer, incomprehensible scale of what happened when British India was partitioned into the independent states of India and Pakistan. In a matter of mere months, 14.5 million people left their homes. They were crossing these newly drawn arbitrary borders in a chaotic, desperate search for the safety of a religious majority. And in that ensuing chaos and communal violence, estimates tell us that up to 1 million people died. 1 million lives, just gone, in a single flash of historical upheaval. To truly wrap our heads around the chaos, let's break down those demographic shifts. It was a massive population exchange. We're talking over 7.2 million Muslims moving to Pakistan, while over 7.2 million Hindus and Sikhs moved to India. In the Punjab region alone, a staggering 11.2 million people were uprooted. And the thing is, the newly formed governments were completely unequipped to deal with migrations of this magnitude. The infrastructure just wasn't there. There were practically zero real plans for these people, and that absolute lack of preparation led directly to mass slaughter on both sides of the new border. But, numbers really only tell us the what. They never tell us the how or the why. They completely erase the individual. Enter the poem To Waris Shah. Back in 1947, Amrita Pritam was a 28-year-old poet. She was pregnant, and she was a refugee, forced to flee her home in Lahore for New Delhi. And during that harrowing, absolutely terrifying journey, she scribbled her total anguish into this very document. She wrote this poem specifically to bridge that massive gap between cold bureaucratic statistics and the raw, bleeding human tragedy that she was actually living through. So the crucial point here is, who actually is Waris Shah, and why is she calling out to him of all people? Well, Waris Shah was an 18th century classical Punjabi poet. He wrote Heer Ranjha, which is basically considered the quintessential epic of love in classical Punjabi literature. So by invoking him, Pritam is making this desperate plea. She's calling on the ultimate poet of love to wake up from his grave and bear witness to a land that has been completely, violently drained of it. She's brilliantly using the memory of love to highlight the stark, horrifying reality of hate. Now, this is exactly the moment where fact translates into poetry. On one hand, you have the grim historical reality, right? Communal violence, corpses strewn across pastures, mass slaughter. But on the other hand, you have Pritam's devastating visual metaphor. Blood runs in the Chenab. She doesn't just give us a death toll. She personifies the Chenab, which is one of the 5 great rivers of Punjab, and she turns it into this crimson, grieving entity that is literally overflowing with the blood of her people. It's a striking image that captures generational trauma way better than any casualty report ever could. And listen to the profound emotional resonance here. Some hand hath mixed poison in our live rivers. The rivers in turn had irrigated the land. Pritam absolutely refuses to just list the facts of the conflict. Instead, she's creating this terrifying narrative of a land being intentionally, maliciously infected by an outside force. The very water that gave life to this entire agricultural heartland has been tainted, fundamentally altering the soil, and worse, the souls of the people who live on it.
Okay, let's actually decode this metaphor. What exactly is the poison? Well, it obviously isn't a literal toxin. The poison represents the divide and rule policy and the deeply corrupt, toxic political rhetoric that contaminated the minds of the people. This hallucination of otherness was inserted right into the populace, intoxicating everyday people with revenge. And ultimately, it turned a rich, fertile agricultural land into a sprawling graveyard. It is such a brilliant way to explain how systemic political failure trickles all the way down into individual acts of violence.
And watch how this metaphor evolves. It's so good. The poisoned air blew into every wood and turned the flute bamboo into snakes. The imagery shifts in such a chilling way here. The natural beauty and the sweet music of Punjab, which she represents with the flute bamboo, are physically twisted into something deadly and terrifying. The very elements of culture and joy are mutated into literal instruments of death. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how this poison operated. Those venomous snakes represent the rapid spread of propaganda and communal hatred that was biting the people of Punjab. The metaphorical cobras stinging the charmers symbolize how selfish political leaders, by spreading their venom, ended up destroying the very brotherhood, compassion, and unity of the entire region. There's this tragic irony to it. The tools of art, music, and peace were weaponized against the very people who created them, leaving this massive cultural void in their wake.
Which brings us to a deeply cultural metaphor, the snapped spinning wheel, or trinjan. Now, this wasn't just a physical object. When it snapped, the song was crushed in every throat, and the hum of the rural economy fell completely silent. But more importantly, the trinjan was the traditional space where the daughters of Punjab would gather to sing, share their sorrows, and support one another. So its destruction represents the severing of female friendships and the total breakdown of cultural harmony. It specifically highlights the shattered, isolated lives of the women during this immense crisis, women whose trauma is honestly so often overlooked in standard historical texts.
This isolation and betrayal all culminate in this final, heartbreaking quote, "It seems all people have become kaidos, thieves of beauty and love." It perfectly, flawlessly captures the sheer tragedy of neighbors turning into murderers. It's a gut-wrenching realization that the danger wasn't just coming from new borders or distant politicians, it was coming from within the community itself. But to really grasp the full weight of this, we need to know who Kaido actually is. Right, so in Waris Shah's epic Hare Ranja, Kaido is the maternal uncle of Hir. He acts as the ultimate villain, the one who cruelly and intimately betrays the lovers. By saying that all people have become Kaidos, Pritam is making a staggering accusation. She's saying that ordinary people, everyday neighbors who once shared meals and celebrated festivals together, have become villains and betrayers of humanity. The invisible threads of love that once bound the community together have completely snapped, leaving a society totally unrecognizable to itself. Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with a very profound question. When history leaves us with nothing but staggering numbers and senseless violence, is poetry the only way we can truly remember? Amrita Pritam used these powerful literary metaphors to beg Waris Shah to write a new page in the book of love for future generations. She left us a literary masterpiece, so we would never, ever forget the human cost of the divide. She preserved a generational trauma that facts alone just can't hold. And it leaves you wondering, how will future generations remember our history? Thanks so much for joining me today, and as always, keep seeking to understand the deeply human stories behind the numbers.